Welcome back. Data has been an integral part of vital information sharing in the public sector, but the recent crisis highlighted challenges around data security, digital skills, and data implementation. The use of NHS data was at the forefront, of course, of fighting the coronavirus, but we can't stop there. To ensure better decisions, government as a collective needs to unlock the potential data can give. Therefore, all departments have to ensure that data can be shared and made available through trusted platforms across government. Building on the government's national data strategy and DCMS's 10 tech priorities, the importance of unlocking the power of data by removing the barriers to responsible data sharing is paramount to ensuring a positive move forward to digital transformation. Our next panel will examine past, current, and future use of data and how the sector can unlock its full potential to enable better decision making. To explore this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by Kaz Mohammed, Vice President Digital Energy UK and I at Schneider Electric, Professor Harris Muratidis, Institute for Analytics and Data Science at the University of Essex, and Hannah Spiro, Head of Public Attitudes at the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. And don't forget, if you do want to be included in the conversation, then please feel free to use the Q&A function. You can do so at the bottom of the screen, and you can also share your thoughts on LinkedIn by using our hashtag PSE365. Well, good morning. Let's see who we've got here. As I put my glasses on, I'm realizing that we've got Hannah and we've got Harris, but I think we might be missing Kaz. Is that right? No Kaz at the minute. Okay, well, we'll kick off with Harris, if that's okay. Professor, it sounds a really simple question, but can you just give us an overall sense of how important and critical data actually is?
Yeah, sure. Hi, good morning. Data is at the heart of all the activities that we do. Everything that we do in our society has, in some element, an impact on the usage of data. So it has effectively become an asset, and therefore it has a value, and therefore it has some kind of importance. But I think if we look at it from a decision-making point of view, data is important because it can help us build a better understanding of certain areas of interest, and it can facilitate more accurate forecast based on real-time updates. The recent pandemic is a good example of that. We need to be able to take decisions on data that is as accurate and as frequent as possible. Having 3 or 4 days old data, it doesn't really provide any benefit for us. But I think it's also important because it allows organizations to more effectively determine the cause of problems and identify relationships between the different elements that exist in an organization that probably is not easy to see with a naked eye. So it helps in that aspect as well. It is important for that. But I think one of the most significant benefits of data is that it provides evidence, and it allows us to check the effectiveness of solutions and kind of stop the guessing game. And help us take informed decisions and verified decisions, not just based on past behaviors and instincts, but on what is really happening. And I think that's the important element of data that has an important impact to everything that we do nowadays.
I'm glad to see Kaz has popped up. Kaz, I'll be with you in a second. Hannah, I just wanted to ask before we kind of move on. I know I said to Harris that sounded quite a basic question, the value and the importance of data, but actually listening to Harris's interesting response there, I just wondered if, what your thoughts are, and it does sound a basic question, but it isn't really. How valuable do you see data as being, and how impactful can it be?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Nice to be here, and completely agree with what Harris was saying about the importance of data for decision making. I suppose my angle at the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation is that we spend a lot of time researching the public's attitudes towards data and where they see the risks and opportunities of data use. And from our research, we do find that the public do see potential for data to be used to unlock innovation, but we need public trust to actually enable that innovation. And we know that this low public trust can actually act as a barrier to data-driven innovation. And when we don't have public trust in data, it might be that organizations hold back from innovating with data. There might be fears of public backlash and reputational damage. And we also know that citizens might actually be wary of opting into data sharing schemes. So then we get these data sets that aren't representative of society. So to actually unlock this value of data that Harris is talking about, we really need to understand what are the public's concerns about data use and what can we do to address them. So at CDI, we do lots of deliberative public engagement to actually help decision makers understand the elements of governance that are most important to building a trustworthy environment for data sharing. And we just spend time understanding kind of what the public actually see as these risks and opportunities, but also how this varies across the population, and then feed that into UK data policy.
We'll come back to that piece of work actually that you published earlier this year in Public Attitudes, because I think that was quite fascinating. I'd like to dig a bit deeper there, but let's bring Kaz into our conversation. I know, Kaz, you want to talk a bit further in the conversation specifically about buildings, as that's a division you head up, and you know, you can relate how the data is useful in what you do. But just more generally at Schneider and Electric, how key is data in your decision making and in your life there?
Yeah, so morning, Helen. Hopefully you can hear me all right.
We can. I'm glad to see you. I put my glasses on and you weren't there, which was quite alarming, but you are now, which is good.
No worries.
I'm going to have a mouthful of coffee while you talk.
So, in terms of my kind of business and just my own kind of life, I think in the last 3-4 years, we've seen more data that is kind of being accumulated. And I think there's kind of two pieces to it. One is about making sure that we have the right kind of streams of data and the quality of data as well coming through. What I found is that sometimes we will waste time, a lot of time in data and where it's come from. So making sure we have that as a fundamental is key. I think the second piece is then where we've got some really smart type tools or analytics or insights to be able to crunch that data and make it meaningful. You know, the stats out there of just how much data we're actually sat on as organizations, as people, but how little of it we actually use. And I think a big kind of reason around that is the viability of putting that data in something which is meaningful, something that we can look at quickly and make some decisions and kind of be able to test that through. So that's where we spend a lot of time, and we use a lot of dashboarding and data hubs and teams now to be able to give the insights of just what's happening and make kind of quick decisions on the back of it.
Harris, on the back of that, how can we unlock the power of data to empower better decision making? As Kaz says, there's so much of it. How can we make sure that we're using it and actually taking advantage of what's out there to make, you know, better decisions?
Yeah, I think as Kaz and Hannah mentioned earlier on, there is a lot of data that we have available. So we need to ensure that we improve the quality of that data, because that is an important element of taking the right decisions. And by quality, I mean the completeness of the data, how complete it is, the consistency of the data, the accuracy of the data. There is a number of elements that we need to improve to ensure that the decisions we make actually are based on trustworthy data that was mentioned earlier on. And I think there's a number of reasons that might have an impact on the quality of the data. Issues related, for instance, to data collection. Issues related to entry errors, software mistakes. I mean, the list can go on and on. We can have a lot of inaccurate data. The more data you have in some elements, you know, it might be a bit not as accurate as you want it to be. We might have not up-to-date data, and fragmentation of data is also quite important. So in order to improve on all those elements, we need to do better. We need to do better on addressing those issues, and we need to have better ways and better processes of having a systematic approach towards addressing those issues. Using, for instance, better data governance is quite important. So we need to understand the issues that stops us from using data in the way that we want, and we need to try to do better on improving on those. I think I just wanted to say also.
Yeah, carry on.
I just want to say also there is the importance of trustworthiness is quite crucial in that element, because it's trustworthiness of collecting the data, is trustworthiness on the use of that data. So we need to have a very clear idea of how we can improve the trust that people, citizens put on data.
I think Hannah's going to enlighten us that. I'm going to ask her specifically about trust a little later, but I'm just wondering, Harris, whether Sarah's just put a question in, and I don't know whether you feel you could answer this for Sarah. She says that when data is collected for a set purpose with a specific legal basis, how do you tackle the reuse of data for innovation? Obviously, statistical information is anonymous, but when there's business pressure to use contact details to offer, for example, new services.
I lost Helen. I'm not sure if it is just me.
Yeah.
No,
I've lost her as well.
And I couldn't hear the whole question, so I'm apologies, but I cannot provide any answer.
Harris, I think the question is in the chat that we can. I'm happy to read it out if you navigate to the ask your question section. Is it useful if I read the question out for you?
Yeah, that will be helpful.
Sure,
Because
I'll take
I don't
on
think I can see it.
So Sarah asks, when data is collected for a set purpose with a specific legal basis, how do you tackle the reuse of data for innovation? Obviously, statistical information is anonymous, but when there is business pressure to use contact details to offer, e.g. new services. And that's the question.
Well done, Hannah. Thank you for chipping in. The platform threw me off there.
So I think that's a really interesting question, and I think there is two elements of that. One is how you can make sure that you comply with relevant policies and regulations. Working at a university, we always have the ethical element of it in the heart of everything that we do. So any type of data that we will be using, it will be going through appropriate ethical consideration and approval. And I think that's quite important, because it can act as a third-party validation on the use of data that you do. But there is also a lot of technology that we can use nowadays to make sure that we can properly anonymize data, or even get information without looking at the data, looking at statistics that they don't have the details of the collected data that we get, but it can gives us an input for further analysis. Using technology such as federated learning, for example, which means that we're not looking at the details of the data, but we're looking at models, and that can help us to get an understanding of new services, of new technologies, of new innovation, without actually having access to the details of the data that is the importance in terms of private and personal information.
Harris, thank you for answering Sarah's question, and Hannah, thank you for holding the fort when I disappeared for a moment. Hannah, I want to talk a bit about some of the work that you published, I think it was in March this year, into public attitudes about data and AI. What were your main findings?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So I guess as way of background, the survey and research that you're referring to is every 6 months we publish a survey tracking the public's attitudes towards data and AI. So every 6 months we ask the same set of questions to a group of 4,000 individuals and repeat those questions to see how attitudes are changing over time. And I suppose one dive into on that tracker survey is that one of the questions we ask is looking at what impacts an individual's willingness to share data with the public sector. I think this builds nicely on Sarah's question. So what we do is we do something called conjoint analysis, where you put two options in front of an individual and say, in which scenario are you more willing to share your data? In which scenario do you feel more comfortable? And then you can vary different things within each option. And that can be so the actor who's using your data, it can be the why, so it can be the what, so the type of data you're using, and also the governance mechanisms that are in place protecting you. And we find consistently in this tracker survey that actually the things that really impact an individual's willingness to share data is primarily the who, so which actor is actually involved in data. And so people's underlying attitudes towards an institution affects whether they trust it to use their data responsibly. And we see some quite interesting results that come through. We find that trust in an actor is driven by two factors. So we see perceived level of ethics and perceived levels of competence of the organization to use your data. So if an individual trusts the organization to use their data ethically and competently, they're more willing to share their data with that organization, and then they're more trusting of that scenario. So we see actors like the NHS coming up as fairly competent and trustworthy. We see something like the private sector as maybe being competent but less trustworthy. So that's a really interesting driver of willingness to share data. And the other one that comes out really strongly is the governance mechanisms that are in place protecting the individual. And we find that when there's emphasis on transparency and accountability, security and privacy, those kind of things, that massively increases an individual's comfort with the situation and their willingness to share data. So a really interesting thing to track over time, but we see those quite consistently coming out in the tracker survey.
That is fascinating, actually, to track and see how people's different views vary, and I can sort of identify with that just myself, which organisations I trust or don't give data to. Kaz, I know you are passionate, as many people are on these platforms, about sustainability, and of course, buildings can play a really, really key role in climate change. So I'm just wondering, what's the role of data from where you sit to improve sustainability on not just new, but also existing estates?
So I think here on sustainability, and I guess we call it digitization. Ultimately, data is part of that kind of digitization of how we look at things. And they're both kind of two sides of the same coin to ultimately try and tackle change and a responsible kind of planet. I think one of the big pieces that we see is around just that willingness to connect things up. So here we have a lot of assumptions about how energy is managed, how energy is moving around a building, how people move around a building, how a facility actually gets used and occupied, and everything from, if you think of in a healthcare environment, to how the cleaning kind of routines happen, to how bed usage happens. And a lot of it is based on assumptions. And actually, when we put in the kind of data and the digitization to understand how the building actually performs and how it behaves, and actually start to look at that different to what our perception is, and we start to see opportunities that, hold on, there's areas of a building which are underutilized or really underperforming in the way that we're actually using it. And sometimes this whole kind of vision of we need extra spaces, we need extra buildings and requirements isn't often kind of true. And actually it's more about the efficiency of what we already have and how then do you drive that. And we do that a lot with buildings, especially kind of post-pandemic, new ways of working type environment now, where we're saying, office space look like? How do we get the most out of it? And exactly how people are using the buildings, what they need and what they get out of it, and then starting to work with our clients ultimately on that.
I know you mentioned your clients there. I know you work in places like offices, hospitals, universities to deliver systems that give optimal efficiency. But should we prioritize the latest data and technologies on new and newer sites versus existing estates? I mean, particularly universities and hospitals, there are many of them using older buildings. And in fact, in the NHS, buildings that are decades, and perhaps universities too, decades old. Where should the priority be? Or are they both as valuable?
I think they're both as valuable, I'd like to say, but let's be kind of honest about it and upfront, is that the UK and Ireland building stock is quite historic. That is likely, especially when you start thinking of protected assets in the States, i.e. kind of listed buildings. And technology in the last kind of 10 years has moved with respect to retrofit. So if we think of kind of Wi-Fi devices, IP connectivity, the ability to kind of put this smaller chipset into pretty much any license system, it's freely available. We've got battery Wi-Fi technology that is pretty reliable, kind of lasts a couple of years or so, easy to put into them kind of environments, and pretty low cost as well. And that will continue to develop. So I think the retrofit market, sometimes it's a little bit daunting for people to think about, but there's a huge opportunity, real positive effect in them kind of buildings.
Harris, at the heart of all this data, of course, is security. And why is security so important, so vital?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First of all, I would also like to invite you to come across at the University of Essex, because we have some very new buildings there that we can all get the benefits from. But going back to your question, the work that we do at the Institute for Analytics and Data Science looks at security, data security across two different dimensions. The technological, obviously, element and dimension of it, which involves developing new solutions in order to be able to make data more unreadable, restrict access to data, help with developing backups and support recovery when data is lost. Looking also on how we can better understand, identify, and maybe mitigate security and privacy risks through network analysis or technology analysis and risk analysis. So there is a number of technological tools that we can develop to help us improve the data security dimension. I think going back also to what we said earlier on, data is effectively an asset. It has value, and as a result, we need to ensure that it is protected against unauthorized access. We need to ensure that it is protected against corruption and against theft. So using the technological solutions can help us to move towards that direction. But for me, I think, and another element that we're looking very close at IATS at Essex is the human dimension. And the human dimension is equally important when we talk about data security. In fact, a lot of the research that we have done shows that the human error is a leading cause of data breaches, with around 80% of data breaches being due to human error, either accidental or malicious. So understanding how the technology and humans work better in order to improve data security is quite significant. There is a lot of challenges I think we still have to overcome. The large growth of data. We're generating more data than ever before. So the large amounts of data plays an important role on how we can ensure that it can be secure. New technologies or interconnectivity that exist nowadays between pretty much everything also means that there are more opportunities there for malicious attacks or even for error. So it does increase the possibilities for security and data breaches. But again, looking at the human element of that, the lack of skills, lack of education, lack of awareness are important and significant factors that play an important role on data security. And we do a lot of work in order to understand how we can improve that. So technology is one part that can help us, but the human element is equally important, if not more important, when we talk about data security.
Yeah, Hannah, how Warriors data, the people you surveyed, which kind of links us all back into that public trust element again, doesn't it? I mean, I think one of the reasons perhaps the public don't have as much trust as perhaps one would like is because they do worry about the security of information they're giving.
Yeah, I think a really interesting question that we see front of mind for the public, which is linked to the security of the data, is how transparent we are being about how people's data is being used. And we know that transparency is a key factor of public trust. And I think in surveys, we have people saying that 78% of the public think it's important for there to be transparency about how their personal information is being shared across government departments. But actually, lots of public sector organizations are slightly unsure of how to be transparent about how they're using data to deliver services. And so something that CDI has been working on is developing the algorithmic transparency standard for public sector, which provides clear information about how algorithmic tools are being used in the public sector and kind of what we're doing with the data there. So actually, to design this algorithmic transparency standard, what we did was we wanted to talk to the public to understand what meaningful transparency looked like for them. And I think the key word there is meaningful transparency. Often people say the example of something like cookies, where we're being transparent, but is it meaningfully transparent for the public? So in polling, when you ask about transparency, often the public say, yeah, I want to know absolutely everything about how my data is being used. The more detail, the better. And then, interestingly, if you follow up with more qualitative public engagement, so you actually spend time sitting with the public, understanding their attitudes and their concerns, and we actually mocked up examples of what an algorithmic transparency standard could look like, the public start to say too much information is overwhelming. And actually, this is the information that is prioritized as being meaningfully transparent that I would want to see upfront. And then there's a second tier of information which the public think is important to be available somewhere. And that might be the more technical information about what data is being used, how it's being used, how the algorithms have been tested. But they wouldn't necessarily review that information themselves. They would expect others to review that information on their behalf and report back if there's any issues. So I think that's something that's really linked and fundamental to public trust, is just how can we actually be meaningfully transparent about the use of data. I mean, that's an example of using data in the public sector, but I think the same applies to the private sector. And there's some really nice examples of transparency, and there's things like the Google model cards, which just give quite clear explanations of how data is being used. But I think as more and more data is used for more and more reasons, I think that's going to be fundamental to actually building that public trust.
It's time as well, isn't it? You know, when I get asked about cookies and things, I've gone the other way now. I used to take, have all, and now I go the other way, only the key ones, because I haven't got time to read all the detail now. I think we all lead such busy lives. Kaz, before we come to an end, I'd like to talk about digital twins a bit. I'm always a bit fascinated with digital twins. We talk about that in all areas of the conferences that I host here. What benefits can digital twins bring to public sector sites? Kaz, have I got you there? Kaz,
sorry, you're breaking up a little bit. So
digital twins I was asking you about, and the benefit that the use of digital twins can bring to public sector sites.
I mean, it's huge. This is essentially something that is not just the operational phase of a building or an environment. It's in the kind of design side as well. So if you think that you have this digital twin of how something is going to be developed and how it's actually going to work in kind of real time, and you start to tweak your design construction phase along with it, then this is where you find the efficiencies. This is where you find the pockets of kind of where you can improve things pretty rapidly, and where we've seen companies deploy in that kind of design phase, in that early construction phase as well. They've generally seen huge reductions, around 25% reductions in things like wasted materials, in things like wasted labor, in program time. And then if you start to think of, well, what's the embodied carbon that's actually associated with that? It has a huge effect on the kind of sustainability landscape. And then once you've got that digital twin and when you're in a building environment, and ultimately, a building environment is constructed in a certain way, how it operates and how it develops over time is often very different. And then this is where we have this kind of little bit of pull then between what was actually delivered and how a building's being used and how it's effectively being run. And a digital twin gives you the opportunity to kind of tweak things as you go along and spot that happening. And then you go through that cycle again. So we see huge benefits. And this is where Schneider are ultimately investing quite heavily in both the design side, but also in the operational side, really making sense of all of that data.
I knew this panel would fly by and I'd be left still with questions I wanted answering, but we are out of time now. So very big thank you to all of you, to Kaz, Harris, and to Hannah for a really interesting conversation there on data. Well, moving on to our next segment, we have Graham Lewis, Public Sector Lead Specialist, United Kingdom and Ireland from Highland Software, talking about putting people at the forefront of digital transformation. Graham currently leads the public sector practice within Highland in the UKI, helping local and central government transform public services with the adoption of content service automation. Prior to joining Highland, Graham worked with multinational high-tech organisations, including IBM and Canon Europe. So over to you, Graham.
So thank you for that. So hopefully you can hear me. And you can also see me. So over the next kind of 10 to probably 12 minutes, to allow a little bit of time for questions if possible, I'm going to kind of take you through a few sort of sections and talk through why citizens should be at the forefront of digital transformation and the journey that we would propose and steps you might want to take during that kind of journey. So if we could advance this slide. So I'm going to cover 5 key areas within the short presentation we've got. Why innovate, reality versus expectation, the need to create an innovation or transformation culture in order to be able to deliver a digital transformation journey, some of the key steps to that success, and then very, very briefly just go through an example of a customer government organisation that we've supported, taking them through those sort of 6 steps. Next slide, please. Here are my details. You will have them in the networking chat. You can find me on LinkedIn. So I'll kind of quickly go over that one. So why do we need to innovate? So I think one of the major challenges for the public sector has been the increasing pressure that essentially has been brought on by the private sector. So the private sector has been, I should probably add, some of the private sector have been producing quite an improving yardstick for digital services. And I think that's been a catalyst for change within government, and it's been a driver for change in government. You know, once you factor in on top of that, the other internal and external factors such as modern day working practices, post-pandemic hybrid working practices, public trust, it does really create this kind of perfect storm of why organisations and public organisations really do need to continue to innovate to be able to keep pace with some of the private sector initiatives and services that they offer. So next slide, please. And I would say that that's down to reality and citizen expectation as well. So citizens don't just want these types of things; they expect them. So they want from a public sector organisation or a government organisation, they want the same level of service as they get from their favourite retailer, from their banking institution. This kind of omni-channel, kind of 365, 24/7 self-service capability is what they kind of are now expecting through public services. So, this need to innovate, this need to be able to develop services like this is absolutely critical. And it was highlighted in a paper, Transforming for Digital Future by Hannah Wheeler as well. So, this is something that is absolutely at the forefront of people's minds and what they need to be doing. Next slide, please. So, the challenge with all of this, so it's all very well saying, we must innovate, we must be digital first, we must digitally transform, but it's the kind of the how, what are the sort of steps that you need to do, because digital transformation is not just about starting from scratch, because often there is digital estates that already exist, there are skills and employees and resources that already exist. So I'm going to kind of take you through a few steps in a second about what we would recommend as the 6 steps to review. And not all of them are going to be relevant, but certainly some of them will be pertinent to undertaking the digital transformation journey. So creating the right approach and the right culture, as many of the speakers prior to me have talked about, is absolutely critical. So next slide, please. So the 6 areas to consider when exploring the transformation program. So people, leadership, visibility, innovation, outcome, and flexibility. I'm going to go now step by step through some of these and then follow that up with a sort of real world example. So next slide, starting with people. So as demonstrated by some of the prior speakers, this sort of skills gap. So when looking at a digital transformation journey, it's absolutely critical that you're looking at the right talent, making sure that you're enabling that talent to be the best that they can be, creating a stimulating work environment, but equally complementing it, and this is a selfish plug for myself, is complementing it with the right external suppliers. So those are some of the things that we would look to explore. And just to touch upon the recruitment of the right talent, addressing the skills gap. In that sort of white paper or policy paper that I mentioned, the need to recruit the right people has become somewhat easier by modern working practices these days. So there is still a need often to have people in the office to be all in the right place at the right time all together. However, it used to be, and in order to do that, the talent would have to be regionally based, because you would have to, unless you wanted to commute huge distances to come to the office, that would be something that you'd be looking from a regional pool of people. Whereas now, this kind of concept of hybrid working practice means actually you could have somebody working in Scotland working for a southern borough, for example. So this idea of opening the market based on modern working practices is actually really encouraging. Next slide, please. Leadership. So again, it was talked about rethinking of roles and competencies is leading to kind of better end-to-end or employee experiences as well. So the additions of things like CDIOs for managing transformation projects is also really important. So these will both be critical with improving customer experiences, outcomes, and also advocacy as well. Next slide, please. Visibility. So again, looking at visibility as part of the transformation program is and has been touched upon by some of the other speakers as well. So lead with transparency. The lady that was in the previous session was talking about the right kind of visibility, the right kind of trust that you're generating. So when you're looking at the transformation program, think about how the data can be managed, think about how it can be visible, how you can be transparent with your policies, and what you do with that data, etc. Next slide. Innovation. So creating friendly policies and ideation. So really trying to encourage people to bring forward ideas, an innovation culture, an idea culture, bringing together better improved processes, better improved practices, will also help you with your digital transformation initiatives. Next one, please. Being outcome orientated. So start with the technology, and I'm biased in that respect, but make sure that when you are looking at the technology, it's outcome oriented. Start in agile waves, steps, where you can deliver quick wins from your project, and also make sure that people care about a particular project. So all too often there is a kind of technology for technology's sake, and people don't really believe in what they are producing. So make sure people are bought into the technology, make sure they're bought into the steps and actually want to deliver that. Okay, next step, please. And flexibility. So flexibility, making sure that whilst things often do go to plan, but they don't. Sometimes they don't, right? So endorsing a long-term strategy which has the ability to change, making sure that the decisions you're making in your journey are for the longer term, making sure that that they are adaptable to change. So if something does come up, if there's a pandemic, if there's another force majeure, making sure that you do have that ability to change. So one of the things that I want to kind of walk you through is a real world example of that. So if I could kind of move on to the next slide, please. And the next slide, please. So Highland have a customer whereby we utilised our technology to support an identity document application process. So as I'm sure you can appreciate, this is a highly process-driven initiative. It was something that involves huge amounts of complexity. So we were part of a technology consortium that were contracted to bid for this, or were successful in bidding for this in 2021. So the challenges here were increased processing times, causing huge amounts of delay, limited automation, little data visibility internally, and most importantly, putting that customer at the centre of this process is the customer didn't know, or the applicant didn't know, where their process or where their application was in the process, what was happening in that process, what steps needed to be taken, was there any further information required. They were very much in the dark around that. So the objective for the consortium and us was putting the system first and at the forefront of the application, and allowing them to intuitively manage their application, making sure that they had access to content services, information management, and process automation. So kind of just walking through the different steps here. So it's starting with people. So what the customer did was they looked to go to the market to identify where they had skill gaps, and what the type of blend of skills that they required in order to fulfill this particular need. So what they did is they created a nucleus of internal project individuals to gather requirements and to be able to source the right partner. And in doing that, what they did is they selected a series of partners with a proven partnership and strong success record of bringing good outcomes. So that's the sort of people part. Leadership. The executive leadership within this particular process took a very, very active role in the delivery of this particular project. They were actively involved in the project planning stages, vendor selection, milestone creation, etc. And so from the outset, the project team had direct access to senior stakeholders, which really supported the project being moved forward. Moving through to visibility, clear understanding on the business objectives, making sure that they were able to create a baseline for that. And what we were then able to do was, as a result of creating the baseline, was create clear visibility of improvement, and also being able to gather system experience data as well in that particular process. Innovation and ideation. So we worked with the customer to create regular workshops for all parties to foster and breed a culture of innovation and ideation. Finally, the last two, whilst keeping the larger deliverable at mind, we were able to create small milestone type steps whereby, rather than creating this kind of big bang deliverable, which inevitably has its own challenges, we were able to focus on success and replicating that success rather than failing at the first hurdle with this unachievable goal. And then finally, flexibility. The entire working group were able to remain agile throughout and adaptable to change. So that was something that was really critical as part of the process. So what we've been able to deliver is a highly visible process and highly automated process for the delivery of this identity management application process. And the customer now has some visibility, much greater visibility into the process as to where they are in the process. So I appreciate this has been a very short presentation. I hope you found it useful and informative. If you wish to know a little bit more about what Highland has to offer, it's a bit of a shameless plug from us that we're doing a Highland Summit on the 20th of October, covering things like content services modernisation, reaching into that kind of digital transformation piece a little bit more, panel migration, RPA, no code, application development, and much more. So that's taking place on the 20th of October in November. It would be great to see you there. So any questions or thoughts in the last few minutes? Don't all shout at once. I think that kind of summarises the presentation. So I think without further ado, I'll hand it back to Helen, I think.
Share what Highland has to offer, and for your shameless plug there. It was great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. Let's take another break now and look forward to more thought-provoking conversations to come. It's a perfect opportunity to discover our PSE 365 platform featuring our digital marketplace and the speed networking function. So I'll see you for our next session in 10 minutes time.